I've got a question. Why do people still spread this false narrative that past performance has no impact on future performance? That's clearly not true for XRP. Have a look at this here. What we see on the x-axis, that's the past performance. What we see on the y-axis is the forward performance. There's clearly negative correlation. As in, when XRP performed well, it tends to perform not as good going forward, and vice versa. XRP is one of the very few cryptocurrencies that have been able to stay relevant throughout the years. What we see over here, that's snapshots on CoinMarketCap. How did the top 100 cryptocurrencies develop over time? Let's have a look at the end of August. Bitcoin was at number 1, followed by Litecoin, and then we've got XRP at number 3. Have a look at all of those other tokens: Namecoin, Peercoin, Feathercoin, Novacoin, Primecoin, Terracoin. This was all relevant in 2013, and nobody talks about those tokens today anymore. That's because they all trend to zero. But XRP is still one of the top cryptocurrencies. It's at number 5. We could even argue that it's at number 4 if we exclude Tether as a stablecoin. Hi, my name is Gerhard. I've been in the crypto space for the last 8 years. I hit my first million 3 years ago, and it is mainly through active trading, buying and selling Bitcoin, buying and selling various cryptocurrencies. My track record is linked down below. It's 100% transparent. This is the chart over time. There's also every single trade that I made in the last 2 years logged, that I published in real time when I bought or sold. I don't know many other people here on YouTube that are willing to share all of that transparently. Now, despite XRP being one of the few survivors throughout all of those years, it still underperformed Bitcoin. So from August 2013 to today, it underperformed by 68%. Now imagine it didn't do that underperformance. Imagine it would be 3 times larger. Then instead of being at 80 billion market cap, it would be at 240 billion market cap. It would be at number 2 or at number 3. So potentially it even could have climbed 1 rank. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. Now, why didn't that happen? It's because of token inflation. Over the last 10 years, XRP's supply grew by 77%. That means annualized, it went up by 5.9% every single year. So that compounds over time. Now, I started the video with this chart here, and I want to get into more detail because it might give us a hint of where XRP is going from here. The chart comes from Bitcoin Strategy Analytics. So that's the backtesting platform available for the premium members of this channel. This is the return autocorrelation mode. It's also explained in more detail over here in this tutorial video. And what we are looking at here is the following. We want to see how much historically for XRP did past performance predict future performance. Now, intuitively, we know this, right? When we buy an asset, when it's very depressed, it should outperform going forward, and vice versa. If you already had a run, it's probably rather dangerous to buy the asset because you might see a decline subsequently. But how statistically significant is that effect? The answer is it depends, and it depends on the time window that we choose. This here is an R-square analysis, so it looks at how well does our model work at predicting future prices. What we've got at the x-axis, that's the look-back window. What we've got on the y-axis, that's R-squared. The best look-back window is 704 days, or 1 year and 48 weeks, a bit under 2 years. So when we make this analysis, past performance versus future performance, and we try to figure out where does our model best predict future performance, the answer is we have to take 2 years of the past and 2 years of the future. That's where R-squared, or the fitting, is the best. And that's exactly what we see in this chart. So it's the past 2 years, a bit less than that, versus the future 2 years. Still, we do see how those data points, they don't align perfectly with our regression line. So R-squared of 0.35 is actually not that high. What we want is that the data points are very close to that line. Then it would predict future performance much better. And there is a way to improve this. But just based on this model, here we've got our price prediction. Over the course of the next 2 years, or to be more precise, until the beginning of May 2028, XRP is expected to make an annual return of 68%, which leads to a price target of $3.62. So that's over here on the chart. Very close to the all-time high, but there's no prediction how we are getting there. If we directly appreciate or if we fall a bit further and then appreciate. And most importantly, there's also no prediction on how XRP will be doing relative to Bitcoin. Because if Bitcoin was to double or triple from here over the next 2-3 years, then of course XRP would go up with it. The question is, will the additional risk that we take on by buying XRP over Bitcoin actually be compensated? Because obviously that was not the case in the past. Over the very, very long term, XRP tended to do worse than Bitcoin. Now, as mentioned, that long-term underperformance comes from the token inflation. The supply grows by 5.9% per annum. Now, is 77% over 10 years really that bad? Let's compare this with Bitcoin. Bitcoin during the same time period had 28% of supply expansion. That's only 2.4% per annum, not 5.9. We can also see the halving in this chart, as in the supply growth slows down for Bitcoin over time. We do not see that for XRP. For XRP, the supply growth is very linear. That effect will even get worse over time, because right now Bitcoin's supply expansion is only 0.8% and it will fall down to 0.4%. 0.4% per annum versus 5.9% per annum of additional supply. That does make a difference. Here's a chart you've probably never seen before. This is the supply of XRP relative to the supply of Bitcoin. And so we can see in the early days, XRP supply did not grow much faster than Bitcoin supply. But now, because Bitcoin supply expansion slowed down and XRP supply expansion didn't, relatively speaking, the situation for XRP relative to Bitcoin tends to worsen. 15% additional supply growth over the course of 3 years. Now, price discovery always happens from two sides, right? It's not just the supply, it's also the demand. If the demand for XRP can grow faster than the demand for Bitcoin, then of course it can outperform. But let's crunch the numbers now. Let's see if we can maybe fit our model a bit better by not looking at XRP's past performance versus future performance, but by looking at XRP's relative performance to Bitcoin in the past compared to the future. So we are backtesting this chart now. So let's go again with Bitcoin strategy analytics, autocorrelation, and this time take XRP relative to Bitcoin. I've already run the numbers. I found the best R squared, which this time is not 2 years, but it's 3 years and 41 weeks. And now have a look at how high this R squared is. This is 0.76. In other words, our model here predicts future performance much more accurately. This is then how the scatter plot looks. This model predicts future prices much better compared to this model here. This is just using US dollar prices, but this is using XRP relative to Bitcoin. Again, we've got negative correlation here, right? When XRP performed very poorly relative to Bitcoin, it tends to outperform subsequently and vice versa. When it performed very well, it tends to underperform subsequently. Over the last 4 years, or to be more exact, 3 years and 41 weeks, XRP actually slightly outperformed Bitcoin. It didn't outperform through the entire history, but over the last 3 years and 41 weeks, it did. And so we should be expecting less performance compared to Bitcoin over that time period. What are the actual numbers? Let's have a look. The predicted price of XRP in March of 2030 will be 45% lower measured in Bitcoin. And that's then how that looks like on a chart. 45% less performance. Now, how are we getting there? Again, I don't know if we're going to crash and then recover, or if we suddenly bounce again and then crash down to that level. I do not have a crystal ball, and even this data point isn't certain. Yes, the R square with 76 is quite high, but there's still a bit of spread in this. This is our prediction. We've got the past return, but we don't have the future return, obviously, and the future return does fluctuate quite a bit. Have a look at those green data points. This is just the best guess that we can make based on that data set. It still tells us that holding XRP over the next 4 years is probably not the best decision. It's still very likely going to appreciate measured in US dollars, but is it going to beat Bitcoin, especially with that high inflation rate? I'm not so sure. This is both what the tokenomics tell us, but also what the numbers tell us when we look at relative performance. And in the end, this shouldn't surprise us, because the vast majority of altcoins tend to underperform Bitcoin most of the time. And for the exact same reason, most altcoins have an inflating token supply. The early investors, the insiders, the miners, they are all cashing out over time. And very often the demand cannot catch up with that supply expansion. More supply, less demand means a declining price. And this is actually how I made the vast majority of my gains with those trades. 5.2% average gain after a holding period of 27 days per trade. I think those stats are quite good. And what we do is we look for short opportunities. We look for altcoins that are currently elevated in price and that will likely come back down to earth. For example, here we had our Luna Classic short. We can just click on those dates over here and then we get the Telegram message. And then you can verify every single trade yourself. All of those trades are linked with messages. Here on the 12th of May, that's when we shorted Luna Classic. That's when we got a death cross. And then subsequently on the 26th of May, that's when we closed that particular position. And that was with a golden cross. And so this is a pattern we tend to see quite often in crypto. We see those pump and dumps, and very often it's hard to figure out what token is going to pump next, but it's relatively easy to predict, comparatively speaking at least, when it's going to dump again. That's how those returns are generated. It's not just random luck. It's actually using data to trade. So feel free to try it out. It's currently $125 per month. There's also a 1-week money back guarantee. So in case you don't like premium, just email me over here. I will refund you, no questions asked, but I don't think that you will need that refund. Because once you join, I will send you my favorite trade. So you'll go long one asset, you will go short another asset, we play the delta again. And I'm quite certain that that trade will make you money. And depending on how much you invest in it, you will get the money back directly just with that single trade. Here, this is a position that you will open, that I've got open myself as well. And it's one of the trades that are currently mentioned over here as well. If you enjoyed this data-driven approach of analysis, and if you learned something about XRP that you didn't know before, then feel free to subscribe over here. I publish videos regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. See you next time here on YouTube or see you on Premium. Link pops up here on the screen. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Cheers.